And the backfield's out in Owings Mills in preparation for fake football. We've got injuries going on there, but lo and behold, while you were asleep in the middle of the night, not you, Luke, but the rest of you, Dylan Bundy was tossing a gem out at the Big A in Anaheim, and don't look now, those Orioles that we all wanted them to sell off a week and a half ago, they're back at 500 and just 3 games back in the loss column from wild card activity. Luke, there's a real pennant race going on if people are staying awake, right?
Oh, no question about it. I mean, we left this team for absolute dead after that Cubs series to begin the second half. They were 7 games below 500. They were blown out in the final 2 games of that series, and I don't think you could find anyone who really thought they had much of a chance. I mean, mathematically, yes, they did, but you're talking about a team that had been playing terrible baseball from the middle of May until the middle of July, and lo and behold, since then, they've gone 14-7, and they're back at 500 for the first time since late June. They're just, they're right within striking distance of that second wild card spot, just a game and a half out of Kansas City and Tampa Bay tied for that second spot right now, and they're playing really good baseball. They've won 8 of 10, which is the first time they've done that well over a 10-game stretch since they were 22-10, and they're pitching a lot better. And oh yeah, Manny Machado's hitting .376 over the last month, and there hadn't been a whole lot of home runs over that stretch, but he hits the big blow in the 7th inning to give the Orioles a 6-2 lead. And Dylan Bundy, as you said, terrific, career-high 10 strikeouts, didn't walk a single batter, other than Mike Trout, which plenty of pitchers can say that over the last several years facing the L.A. Angels. Bundy was terrific. Good use of all of his pitches. This was as good as he's been all year, and to follow up his 8-inning performance in his previous start, really like to see that after the extremely rough month of July that he had.
Yeah, right around midnight, Machado wins the game. I mean, just flat out, they needed a big at-bat in that situation, and we haven't seen big situations happen recently, right? Because the team hasn't been so good. Now, once you get to 500, they're all big situations because, let's be honest, for the last 6 or 8 weeks, we didn't see this team as a pennant race competitive team, even on big nights, even big pitching performances by Jimenez have been, and even Miley surviving, have been a little bit lost. The heat turns up a little bit right now. They have certainly turned this around. I don't think they're going to win the World Series, but I think they can play games in September that matter if this is the time they're going to turn it on. And obviously, with Seattle, with Anaheim, not so much Oakland this weekend, but these are the teams that are going to be getting in the way.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we said that this is such a critical road trip. It's not just critical from the standpoint of you want to get back over 500, reestablish yourself as a legitimate contender. I mean, it's one thing to cite only being 2.5, 3, 4 games out of the wild card, but if you have 6 teams ahead of you, then you know that really is a lot worse than it sounds mathematically. So if you get in a situation where you take 2 or 3 from the Angels, you win a series in Seattle, and get yourselves in position where you're a couple games ahead of those teams, then you can start to look ahead and say, okay, well, there's Kansas City and Tampa Bay. So it's really critical from that standpoint, and this team just needs to continue this momentum that they've been able to build. I remember when we talked after they had won five in a row, finished off that series against Kansas City. I said at that point in time I thought this team was another 10 days of really good baseball away from making this thing really interesting, putting themselves in good position. Not that they'd be in the driver's seat, but not looking like, okay, pretender, contender. No, another 10 days of really good baseball, they're a wild card contender. And I think you put them in the same light of any of these teams. And we know that these are flawed teams. I mean, all these teams have kind of exchanged 3-game winning streaks, and then they lose 3 of 4, and then they win 4 straight. At some point, you would think one of them is going to take off, at least to some degree. Kansas City did that for quite a while, but they've really cooled off, thanks in large part to the Orioles last week. But, Tampa Bay, just a few games over 500. Seattle, a game over 500. The Orioles now at 500. I mean, it's really it's anyone's game in that regard to that second spot. If you buy into the fact that the Yankees or the Red Sox, whoever prevails in the division, or whoever doesn't prevail in the division, looks like a good bet for that top wild card.
And the Yankees have had their struggles.
Yeah, exactly, and the Red Sox have. I mean, every time you think Boston's really going to take off and run away with this thing, then they come back to earth.
Well, they're getting up on 15 games over 500 right now, but they haven't lost in a week.
Sure. But I meant over the course of the whole season. I mean, they played really well, and yes, they were my favorite from day one to win the division. But the point is, I think those two teams, they're the class of the AL East at this point. Until the Orioles or the Rays make them not. Until they make you think differently.
Well, there's a lot of games amongst these teams in September, and I guess that's why the longer the Orioles can survive and hang in and no one else runs away. And I mean, Kansas City looked like they were going to run away, then they came here last week, right?
Yeah, I mean, it can change on a dime. And, just look at the Orioles over the course of this season. The first 5 or 6 weeks of the season, they looked like they were, they looked like it was 2014 all over again, where there were 12 games over 500. And we see how quickly it turned. And now, over the last 3 weeks, we've seen it turn again. So, the truth probably somewhere in the middle.
Well, the truth comes October 1st.
Yeah. But they're really, they're pitching much better. We've seen the bats awaken. Machado kind of leading the charge there. But clearly they've had great seasons from Scope and Mancini. Adam Jones has seemed to take a liking to the leadoff spot. It's just they're playing a lot better baseball. They're healthier than they've been. They're going to get Trumbo back as early as Wednesday. He's going to be activated. So they get healthier in that regard.
Well, they went all that stretch without O'Day, all that stretch without Britton, all that stretch without Davis. And Davis is going to have some form of warmth at some point. Davis is going to hit 5 home runs some week. I don't know what week it's going to be, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, for all the frustration, that he's going to have a stretch where he might win them a couple games and might carry them for a week, 10 days.
Hey, look, we were trading Machado 3 weeks ago, and he won the game for them in the middle of the night last night. Along with Bundy, but
yeah, and we talked about this the other day. But he has been so much better since early July, where you really saw him start to use all fields again. We saw in the first half of the season. Yes, he hit into a lot of luck. His exit velocity, his batting average for balls in play, there was tough luck mixed in there. I think anyone who watched him, you saw it. And
you saw his frustration with it as well.
Well, you also saw the approach where he was pulling the ball too much and trying to hit too many fly balls, trying to hit too many home runs. And since he's gotten back to that approach that really we saw in 2015, where just started driving the ball the other way and started becoming a more complete hitter, we've seen the average go up. And here recently, we've seen him start hitting the ball out of the ballpark again. But got a hanging slider in the top of the 7th inning. Certainly took advantage of that. But it was absolutely. Think about it. The batter before Jones gets hit by a pitch, it was 0-2, I believe, that prolonged that inning and gave Machado a chance. So you've just been seeing more of that, more better at bats. They've been in a position where they're willing to pass the baton. We know this team doesn't walk a whole lot and do things like that, but we've seen them do more of those types of things here of late, and it's really made a difference. And if you just get decent, competitive starting pitching, which they got that from Miley and Jimenez over the final 2 games of the Detroit series, wasn't anything special. You'll take it. They got much better than just competitive from Dylan Bundy on Monday night. He was dominant. That was as good as he's been stuff-wise.
Since April.
Yeah, and even, he's carrying a better fastball than we saw in April. I mean, he was consistently sitting around 93, touching 94, and he held that until the end of the game, to the point where he was still in that 93 range in the 6th, 7th inning.
Well, he's leading the team in innings right now, right? And he's now up to 134 innings pitched, and getting stronger as we see it in nice weather in California late on a Monday night, right? That in August. That's a good sign. That's a really good sign.
It's a really good sign. I still think they need to be judicious when they can get him an extra day or two. I think they need to do that when they're in a position where, and certainly it was a close game until Machado made it a 4-run lead in the 7th inning, it was tied. If there's a blowout situation, can you maybe limit his pitch count to 85 or 90 on a given night? You'd love to see that. They can't throw that out the window because of where they are in the standings, but you do need to do some things where you want to try to keep him available, that if you do get into mid-September, that you can kind of take the reins off him again and just let him pitch. So that's going to be interesting. That's one reason why they acquired Jeremy Hellickson, to at least just have another arm that's reliable, if nothing else. So we'll see how he does in his second start with the Orioles.
Well, this is fascinating against Bridwell, too, right? So, I mean, Bridwell, who was around here forever, like since before I knew you, sort of forever, and never made it work and never got up, and now he's 5-1 and a chance to beat his. This is a fascinating matchup because Hellickson wasn't around here 2 weeks ago. Bridwell could have been around here. This is one of those, if the Orioles are going to take flight here on the West Coast, this is a nice little swing game on Tuesday night.
It really is. I mean, you as much as you love starting the road trip off with a win like they got on Monday, you want to take the series. You win the first two, and then at the very least you're guaranteed of a series win, and that's kind of the formula that they're back into. The fact that they're back to 500 now, yes, would it help if they could reel off 11 of 12 victories? Yeah, I mean, that's stating the obvious.
Especially on a road trip in California.
But when you look at how this whole thing is played out, when you look at the other wild card contenders, if we're looking just at the wild card position, and if I don't think the Orioles have any realistic chance at winning the division whatsoever at this point, but you look at the wild card and where these other teams stand, they're back in that position now, being at 500. Now that they've won 8 of their last 10, where you can take 2 out of 3. Just win series. I mean, that's as simple as it gets, and you do that the rest of the way, you're going to find yourself in that position of being 12, 13, 14 games over 500, where that might be enough to get the second wild card. And certainly at this point, it looks like it, until we see one of these teams really take off like that. So, it's not as though they have to be unbelievable down the stretch, but they obviously have to be good down the stretch, and you do that by winning series after series after series.
He is Luke Jones. He's up late. He's up early. The Ravens are playing fake football on Thursday night. Sort of the last thing for you on the baseball side. We'll get to football, and I think we've praised Machado and Bundy, and we've certainly discussed the Jeremy Hellickson situation with Anaheim. But, boy, the deaths in baseball this week, and the loss of Don Baylor on Monday, Lee May last week, Dutch Dalton the other day. These were all guys that, I collected baseball cards of. Dutch Dalton was more of a contemporary who, I got to know a little bit during the Philadelphia run in the mid-'90s, and beloved Philadelphia character in Dutch Dalton. And then there's Don Baylor, who wore 15 different uniforms in baseball and began with the Orioles, began with the Oriole way, began with Earl Weaver, began with Frank Robinson. Frank Robinson was dealt off to make room for him at one point in this organization, and a real class act. I mean, it's been a tough week for baseball, and I think for Oriole fans as well, who, like me, Lee May was my first favorite Oriole player back in the 70s. He was the bopper. He hit the bombs, man.
Yeah, no question about it. And, just Don Baylor specifically, as you said, he wore so many different hats and then became a successful manager. So you saw what he did with the Colorado Rockies in the infancy of that organization. And, just someone who had a really good major league career and a long major league career. I mean, you mentioned Frank Robinson being dealt. Of course, Don Baylor was part of the trade for Reggie Jackson, and we saw how that kind of worked out or didn't work out. So
I so remember when Don Baylor first put on that Oakland A's uniform. He only wore it for 6 months, 4 months, whatever it was.
Right.
That was freaky deaky for a 7-year-old kid. I didn't like that
sure.
at all.
Oh, sure. I mean, I can only imagine how jarring that was.
That bothered me.
Probably akin for similar for me seeing Eddie Murray wear a Dodgers jersey.
Oh yeah, right.
And I was he was traded in following the '88 season. I mean, I was 5, 6 years old at that point. So, that's tough, especially when you're talking about someone who, not that Don Baylor had become a a multi-time All-Star by the time he left the Orioles.
Well, the Orioles weren't going to be able to pay him. That was the story in baseball.
Was there. I think anyone who saw the numbers, you saw what kind of player he had the potential to be, and of course, a few years later, won an MVP with the Angels. But I saw a nice moment in Anaheim on Monday night where they had both teams out on the field with a moment of silence. Of course, Don Baylor, someone who meant something to both organizations, but. Tough to see. Darren Daulton is someone I've spoken to you about this. My grandfather, who actually it was 10 years ago that he passed away yesterday, was a big Phillies fan before the Orioles came to Baltimore in 1954, and
wow.
Rooted for both teams. And I can remember that 1993 Phillies team, how fun that team was. Not as a Phillies fan, but as someone who just watched the games because I lived in southern Pennsylvania, watched games with him, and Darren Daulton, someone who had a really good career. But, yeah, tough to see these deaths recently, two of them hitting the Orioles directly, and Darren Daulton, of course, someone who played not far from Baltimore that I think not necessarily any Phillies fans around here, but certainly people familiar with him and a quality career he had for a long time there.
All right, on to football. He is Luke Jones. You can find him, Baltimore Luke, and Luke at WNST.net. We usually separate these segments. Quite frankly, there's not enough going on with the Ravens leading up to a fake football game or enough movement to sit here and blather on about all the stuff you know. Give me the infirmary report, and as you see it, we'll do a full update tomorrow in preparation for the Redskins coming down here on Thursday night and tossing it around. But, I guess the real story is, how's Ryan Mallett look, right? And how's the offensive line look around him? And I saw that Terrence West thinks you should draft him on your fantasy team, which is cool.
Yeah. Terrence West had some interesting things to say. You can check that out in the audio.
I like that he's confident.
Yeah, sure. And I thought one of the telling comments that he made was, hey, I'm from Baltimore. I grew up a Ravens fan. We need to get our running game back to the point that it was in our glory days. Citing, of course, Jamal Lewis for all those years, and then Ray Rice. The three-headed monster in 2008, Harbaugh's first year, where they had McClain, McGahee, and Rice as a rookie. So plenty of confidence there. But overall, still no Joe Flacco. Harbaugh was asked about his level of concern once again on Monday. Just in terms of, at this point, Flacco's missed nearly 2 weeks of practice time and obviously isn't going to play in the preseason opener. Just his level of concern with getting him caught back up. They've made some changes with their running game. They've made some tweaks. You hope Marty Morningwig has made tweaks with the passing game as well, given the fact that it did not function at a very efficient level in 2016. Harbaugh predictably said, they're not overly concerned. Joe Flacco's a 10-year veteran. He knows this offense. There isn't a play that's in their playbook that he hasn't run before, so they're still... that's still the company line at this point. As it sounds like he's getting pretty close to being back on the practice field, but when the exact return date is, we'll see. In the meantime, Ryan Mallett has looked better here of late. Still not as consistent as you'd like, but much better than we saw over the first few days of training camp when the Kaepernick rumors were as hot as they've been. So, you'd really like to see him go out and have a solid performance against Washington. I think that would make everyone feel better. Not to the point where Joe Flacco being back on the field, how that would make you feel, but at least look like a capable backup, look like someone who can move the team fairly well, put a few points on the board, and just have a competency to his game. And we saw him do it a couple years ago when he beat the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's not like he's incapable of doing it, but you'd like to see that in a live game setting. But
the fact that they've kept him around for 2 years, right?
Hey.
I've had half of a conversation with him, and it wasn't all that pleasant, to be honest with you. I watched Hard Knocks. That didn't look pleasant to me.
Yeah.
He hung around with Tom Brady for a couple of years. Belichick kept him around. Houston laid out for him. He wound up coming here. The alarm clocks and all of that stuff can be ancient history, but I don't think, Harbaugh will be putting up with any flack. And quite frankly, Kaepernick's been a better quarterback than him. I mean, at just about every turn, right? And they had their opportunity for that last week, and they didn't go that way. So, Ryan Mallett won't be getting a whole lot of more opportunities that can be better than this opportunity, right?
Well, it's like I said when I wrote about this at WNST.net a couple weeks ago. With Ryan Mallett, I mean, say what you want. And look, I agree with you. I think all things being equal in a vacuum, yeah, Colin Kaepernick's the better quarterback. But at the same time...
Well, so's Jay Cutler to some degree, right? Because he's actually done it, right? The kind of, sort of, right?
Yeah. But the thing is, they signed Ryan Mallett to a 1-year, $2 million deal. And look, that's not a lot of money for a backup quarterback. You know my whole philosophy on that. So I was on board with that idea. But they did that on the first day of free agency. They didn't wait. They didn't explore what other options might be out there, like a Kaepernick or any other number of backup quarterbacks that they could have signed at any point in March and April before they started on-field work in May. They easily could have gone that route. The fact that they signed him when they did leads you to believe that they had some level of confidence in him as a backup. And was it a level of confidence equal to what we're seeing right now with Flacco being sidelined altogether? Maybe not, but if they thought this guy was completely incompetent, then why'd they sign him?
They've had him around here too long to not like him.
Exactly.
That's just and they're in the business of winning. So, I will defer to them, but you've been out there seeing the quails he's thrown around, but you also know he has days when he's capable. And quite frankly, a lot of the issue with him has been confidence over the course of time. He doesn't seem like the most confident bloke, quite frankly.
Yeah, and you know what? It's interesting that you mention that because I've been talking to a couple members of the organization here and there, some media who've covered the team for a long time, and I've had more than one person agree with me on this assessment that he reminds you of Kyle Bowler a little bit, not necessarily personality-wise entirely, because I don't think that would be accurate, but he strikes me as a guy that if he has to be thrown to the fire and not think about it too much, and we saw this with Kyle Bowler how many times, especially when he was backing up Steve McNair, where if he had to play on a whim and he didn't have to think about it a whole lot and he wasn't necessarily preparing as a starter, what ended up happening? He'd go out there and play really well. His problem was always when the expectations were there for him to be the guy, that's when he really struggled. You wonder if Ryan Mallett has a little something similar to that, because look what happened when he beat Pittsburgh when he had been with the organization roughly, 7, 8, 9 days at that point. I mean, there's no way that he had any semblance of mastery of the offense at that point, and yet he went out there and played really well against a team that was fighting for the playoffs at that point.
I took Thomas Dolby to the game that day. He thought he was like Joe Montana.
Yeah, so you wonder if that's the kind of quality that he has. And look, if Flacco misses 7 or 8 weeks with a back issue during the regular season, then I'm guessing Ryan Mallett's not going to work out very well. And certainly they'll be second-guessed, and that's fine. They should be second-guessed, especially if they had a chance to sign Colin Kaepernick and they ultimately elect not to do that, as it's looking like is going to be the case at this point. So, maybe he is that guy that, and my philosophy, get a backup quarterback who's just good enough that you might be able to win a game or two if your starter has to be out 2 or 3 weeks. And beyond that, it's great to have a really good backup quarterback, but how much are you paying? What's the cost for that? And 1 year, $2 million for Mallett, when you consider the other needs that this team has on the roster, like just signing Austin Howard to be their right tackle, like potentially the center position, maybe the tight end position, depending on how these guys look between now and the start of the season, maybe a nickel corner, as we've talked about that being a need, and there isn't a whole lot of cap space. So if you can live with him as your backup, and if he can do a respectable job over a short period of time, to me, that's kind of what you're looking for in a backup quarterback if you're trying to spend your cap resources wisely and to allocate them elsewhere. And I think that's where the Ravens find themselves right now. If they're behind closed doors preparing for Joe Flacco to miss games during the season, then I think they're probably nuts not to sign Colin Kaepernick, even with acknowledging the off-field issues that are at play here. But if they truly are confident that the Flacco thing, if most of the back concerns are behind him now, and it's just a matter of time of being a little extra cautious and getting him back on the field, and it's not going to be an issue at all, if they feel confident about that, then okay. I think you can live with Ryan Mallett being your backup. If they're not confident about that, boy, they're really rolling the dice and taking a major chance here.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. He will be up late with the Anaheim Angels of Los Angeles into the evening, and Jeremy Hellickson and Parker Bridwell will be up watching. There's an afternoon game on Wednesday, and, of course, the Ravens get some fake football going on Thursday night against the Washington Redskins, which always angers up the blood around here. You can find me out in the Bayou Toyota Audio Vault. Got great stuff on the radio this week. I know everybody's been tuning in. I know a lot of people are listening because I'm getting lots of hate mail, which is awesome. Nasty at WNST.net. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as on our YouTube WNSTV channel. And our morning newspaper gets you up at 7 a.m. digitally. It comes to your email inbox. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness at planetfitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. And last but never least, any breaking news, weird stuff, late scratches for the game on Thursday, you'll get all that first on the WNST Tech Service. That is our breaking news service. It is spam-free. It is not fake news. It is all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, getting you ready for aforementioned said fake football with the Redskins on Thursday, 3 until 5 on WNST. It is the SSV on WNST. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.